Stand on any street corner in London and you'll hear a dozen languages in as many minutes. Nearly 40% of Londoners were born outside the UK, one of the clearest measures of how magnetic this city has become. But rewind 2,000 years and you would find Marshland on a tidal river, barely inhabited and of little interest except to an expanding Rome. What happens between then and now is a story of invasion, fire, revolt, and reinvention. A small trading post transformed into the heart of an empire, a city burned to ash and rebuilt in stone, a place that kept drawing people, over and over, from across the known world. For centuries we've had to imagine those earlier Londons from sketches, faded engravings, and traveller's notes. Today, using AI trained on historical imagery, we can take those old drawings and paintings and render them as living streets, the cobbles, the crowds, the smoke curling from medieval chimneys. You're about to witness almost 2,000 years of history in one film. Sit back as we go to where it all began. The year is 43 AD. For Roman legions have just landed on the Kent coast and are pushing inland. They need a reliable crossing of the Thames, a place to build a bridge and secure supply lines back to the continent. They find that crossing here, at the river's lowest ford before it widens into an estuary. Within a decade, Londinium is bustling. Merchants from Gaul, soldiers from Syria, traders from North Africa. The Romans build their bridge exactly where London Bridge stands today, and around it a port town springs up almost overnight. 17 years after the foundation, disaster strikes. Queen Boudica of the Iceni tribe has had enough of Roman rule. Her army marches on Londinium and burns it to the ground. Archaeological digs have uncovered a layer of red ash beneath the modern city, a clear, physical trace of that destruction. The Romans respond by rebuilding, and they rebuild bigger. They throw up a vast defensive wall around the city. Parts of that wall still stand 2,000 years later. At its height, Londinium may house around 60,000 people, making it the largest city in Britannia. Amphitheatres, bathhouses, and forums replacing the frontier outpost the invaders first found. And then, by around 410 AD, Rome itself is crumbling. Barbarian tribes are hammering the empire from all sides, and Britain is too far away, too expensive to defend. Emperor Honorius sends word, "You're on your own." The legions pull out. Without Rome, Londinium's entire economy collapses. The trade networks that brought wine from Gaul and olive oil from Spain simply stop. Roman currency becomes worthless. The merchants leave, the officials leave, the skilled craftsmen leave. Within a generation, a city of perhaps 50,000 people dwindles to a few hundred squatters living in the ruins. For the next 2 centuries, the grand buildings slowly fall apart. Roofs cave in, walls crumble, weeds push through mosaic floors. Still, the Thames keeps flowing. Rivers have a way of attracting new people with new ideas about what a city should be. The Saxons who settled Britain after the Romans don't much like cities. They are farmers, village people. They avoid the old Roman city, seeing it as haunted, cursed. One Saxon poet even calls the ruins the work of giants, unable to imagine how mere humans could have built such massive structures. So, around the 670s, they build a new settlement about a mile west of the Roman walls. They call it Londonwick, London Trading Town. This is where modern Covent Garden and the Strand are today. If you're watching a performance at the Royal Opera House, you're sitting directly above Saxon London. By the early 700s, goods are flowing in from all over. Amber from the Baltic, millstones, and wine jars from the Rhineland, pottery and metalwork from France and Germany. At its peak, Londonwick might have 8,000 people living there, not huge by Roman standards, but clearly thriving. Then the Norse arrive. Starting in the late 8th century, raiders keep hitting the settlement. They soon come up the Thames in force. In 842, they sack Londonwick completely. In 851, they do it again. King Alfred the Great finally has enough. In 886, he retakes London from the Danes and makes a pragmatic choice. He abandons Londonwick and moves everyone back inside the old Roman walled city, which is much easier to defend. He repairs the ancient walls and recuts the defensive ditches. The city is now called Londonburg, London Fortress. Londonwick is left empty, gradually earning a new name, Ealdwick, the old settlement, a name that survives today as Aldwych, the curved street in central London. Over the next century and a half, the city changes hands multiple times between Saxon and Danish rulers. In 1016, King Canute, yes, the one from the legend about commanding the tide, makes London his capital. When Edward the Confessor becomes king in 1042, he builds Westminster Abbey just west of the city. That choice reshapes London's map. The city for commerce, Westminster for power. Edward dies childless in January 1066, and England unravels over succession. Harold Godwin's son is crowned, but William, Duke of Normandy, says Edward promised him the throne. In September, Harold must march north to meet a Norwegian invasion. He wins, but before he can wrest the south is threatened. William lands on the south coast with 7,000 Norman soldiers. Harold races his exhausted army south and meets William at Hastings on October 14th. By nightfall, Harold is dead, and William has won England. On Christmas Day 1066, he is crowned King of England at Westminster Abbey. The Anglo-Saxon era ends. The Normans have arrived, and they will rebuild England in their own image, beginning with London. William does not fully trust a city that backed Harold, so he builds not one but 3 fortresses to keep order. The largest becomes the Tower of London, initially a symbol of oppression and, for the next 1,000 years, a symbol of royal power. Its central keep, the White Tower, is 90 feet high, with walls 12 feet thick in places. It dominates the skyline, a permanent reminder of who rules. Medieval London is cramped, chaotic and growing richer. By 1100, perhaps 15,000 people live here. Merchants band into guilds, goldsmiths, fishmongers, drapers, mercers, and grow powerful enough that the king must bargain with them. In 1215, when the barons force King John to sign the Magna Carta, London's support is crucial. The city wins its own concessions, the right to elect a mayor and protection from arbitrary taxes. London Bridge is rebuilt in stone between 1176 and 1209, a project that takes 33 years. It becomes a city unto itself. Shops and houses line both sides, the bridge contains a chapel and a drawbridge, and the heads of traders are sometimes displayed on spikes as a warning. For over 600 years it remains the only bridge across the Thames in London. In 1348, ships reached London's docks carrying rats. On those rats were fleas, and in those fleas rode Yersinia pestis, the Black Death. Within 2 years, somewhere between a third and half of London's population had died. The city that had grown to maybe 80,000 people was suddenly half empty. Entire streets were abandoned. Bodies piled up faster than they could be buried, and mass graves were dug in fields outside the city walls. Recovery was slow, but by the late 14th century London was growing again. Tensions, however, were rising. In 1381 peasants and urban labourers marched on the city, demanding an end to serfdom and unfair taxes. Tyler led them. They stormed the Tower, executed the Archbishop of Canterbury, and burned the palace of John of Gaunt. The teenage king, Richard II, met them and made promises. The revolt was ultimately crushed. Tyler was killed, the leaders hunted down and executed. The ruling class were terrified. The common people of London had discovered their power, and they would not forget it. By 1500 London's population had rebounded to about 50,000. Then the city exploded. By 1600 it had risen to 200,000. By 1650 it approached 400,000. London became the largest city in Europe. Henry VIII's break with Rome in the 1530s transformed the city's landscape. Henry wanted to divorce his first wife. The Pope refused, so Henry broke with the Catholic Church, made himself head of the new Church of England, and dissolved the monasteries. In London, those religious houses had owned massive tracts of land. Once seized, that property hit the market, and aristocrats and wealthy merchants bought up plots and built grand houses. Suddenly London had room to expand. Under Queen Elizabeth I, the city became the cultural capital of Europe. The Globe Theatre opened on the South Bank in 1599. Shakespeare was staging Hamlet, Othello, and King Lear. At the same time, merchants grew rich from trade with the New World and Asia. The East India Company was founded in 1600, laying the groundwork for empire. Yet London remained dangerously exposed to 2 forces, disease and fire. The city was built almost entirely of timber, with thatched roofs of dried straw and reeds. Houses were packed close together. Upper floors overhung narrow streets and nearly touched across the gaps. Open fires burned in every building for cooking and heating. Candles were everywhere. There were no organized fire services. It was a tinderbox. Both disaster and disease struck in the 1660s with devastating effect. In 1665, the plague returns. Not the medieval Black Death exactly, but close enough. At its peak, some 7,000 Londoners are dying every week. The wealthy decamp to the countryside. The poor are trapped in the city. When the outbreak finally burns out, perhaps 100,000 people are dead, roughly a quarter of the population. A year later, on September 2, 1666, disaster strikes again. A fire starts in a bakery on Pudding Lane after a hot, dry summer and with strong winds fanning the flames. The blaze moves faster than anyone expects. For 4 days, London burns. 85% of the city within the walls is destroyed. 13,000 houses gone, 87 churches lost, including Old St. Paul's Cathedral. Remarkably, only about 6 people die in the fire itself, but some 100,000 Londoners are left homeless. Christopher Wren sees an opportunity and proposes a radical plan. Wide boulevards, classical facades, open squares. It is an enlightened vision, but it is almost entirely rejected. Property rights are too tangled and rebuilding is too urgent. Most streets return to their medieval footprints, even as the city is rebuilt with important changes. New regulations insist on brick and stone instead of timber and thatch, making buildings far more fire-resistant. Wren does win one prize: rebuilding St. Paul's Cathedral. The new church, crowned by its iconic dome, takes 35 years to complete. It still dominates the skyline and will be one of the few major buildings to survive the Blitz centuries later. By the 18th century, London has become a centre of the Enlightenment. Coffee houses act like the internet of their day, hubs where ideas and news spread rapidly. Lloyd's Coffee House becomes Lloyd's of London. Jonathan's Coffee House evolves into the London Stock Exchange. Politically and socially, the city is rising too. In 1735, Robert Walpole becomes the first Prime Minister to live at 10 Downing Street, which will remain the official residence for centuries. In 1761, George III buys Buckingham House as a private residence for his family, the seed of the future Buckingham Palace. The city's footprint is expanding. Westminster Bridge opens in 1750, finally giving London a second crossing after 6 centuries with only London Bridge. Blackfriars Bridge follows in 1769. After Napoleon's defeat in 1815, Britain emerges as the dominant world power, and London is where the money flows. Banks, trading houses, and shipping companies funnel wealth from India, the Caribbean, and Africa into the city. Then the Industrial Revolution arrives and London transforms once more. Factories, railways, and mass production remake the urban landscape. In 1801, London has just over 1 million people. By 1851, it's 2.5 million. By 1901, it reaches 6.5 million, the largest city in the world. The Victorians build on a scale that's hard to imagine. Trafalgar Square is laid out in the 1840s to commemorate Nelson's victory. The Houses of Parliament and Big Ben rise in the 1850s after the old palace burns down, giving the city that iconic Gothic revival face. In 1851, the Great Exhibition opens in Hyde Park. The Crystal Palace, a vast structure of iron and glass, showcases Britain's industrial dominance. 6 million people visit. It is a moment of supreme confidence, Britain at the peak of its power. But the boom brings problems. The Thames becomes dangerously polluted and, after the Great Stink of 1858 when Parliament had to shut down, Joseph Bazalgette builds a sewage system, still in use today, to channel waste away from the river. The Underground, the world's first subway